Good evening. Welcome at the Andere Krant. The Andere Krant is a printed Dutch newspaper that is published on a weekly basis. My name is Elze van Hamelen, and today my guest is Ernst Wolff. Ernst Wolff is a German author, a journalist, and a public speaker, and he has published several books about the global financial system and also the power structures behind it. And that has positioned him in a quite unique place to comment on what has been happening in the last 2 years in the COVID crisis, as this crisis has been seized by these power structures, and they have had a very large influence on what has happened the last 2 years. So Ernst will join us today to share his insights. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So in your work, you have mentioned that it has been not a coincidence that 200 governments followed exactly the same policy during the crisis, and that actually the digital financial complex had a large influence in this. Can you explain what role they have played?
See, the world has been governed by money for several hundred years or for several thousand years. But there's a new power in the background that has come up during the past 50 years, and that's data. So until about the 1970s, it was the big banks that controlled the world. But in the 1970s, some of these IT companies were founded, like Apple was founded in the mid-70s, Microsoft was founded in the mid-70s, then came Amazon in the 90s, Google in the 90s, and then Facebook, which is now called Meta, was founded in 2004, and they have risen to enormous power. See, their market capitalization at the end of last year was about $10 trillion. So from that you can see how mighty and how powerful they have gotten. And they've kind of melted with the big financial institutions. And within the financial system, we've seen a big change also, because we've had this period of deregulation. See, after the war, we had the post-war boom, which lasted until about the 1970s, the mid-1970s. And then we had a period of deregulation. And this deregulation first made the investment banks very powerful. Then after that came the hedge funds. And then around the turn of the century, the big asset management companies took over. The big asset management companies, that is BlackRock, that is Vanguard, that is State Street, and Fidelity. Those are the top 4 of them. And the 4 of them combined now control assets worth about $24 trillion. So you can see that is a real big force in the background. And these 2 forces have sort of combined. They've created some kind of symbiosis. You have the IT companies on the one hand, and you have these asset management companies on the other hand. And that's what I call the digital financial complex. And this complex has taken over the world, especially during the past 2 years. They have made 200 governments in the world comply, and it's their agenda that we're seeing. The crisis that we're witnessing has nothing to do with health. It's the takeover of the world by the digital financial complex.
Can you explain that in more detail about how they have taken over?
Sure, yeah, they have created their own organizations. Some organizations they've just taken over, and then some they have created by themselves. Like they've taken over the central banks. I mean, the central banks are responsible for monetary policy all over the world. But we have seen that the central banks are now controlled by the asset management companies. You could see that in 2018. See, we had the big world financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And that's when the central banks stepped in, and they created enormous amounts of money, and they handed out this money at ever lower interest rates. And then everybody knew that this was not going to last forever, because you can't lower interest rates forever, and you can't create money forever without thus creating inflation. So between 2015 and 2018, they tried to turn around. They tried to taper, that is to change their monetary policy. And actually they tried to raise interest rates. So the biggest central bank in the world, that is the Fed, the American central bank, the US American central bank, the Fed, they raised rates like, I think about 6 or 7 times, 4 times in 2018. And after the 4th time in 2008, it was just small raises. It was just 0.25%. So in 2018, they only raised rates by altogether by 1%. But that caused a major crash in the financial markets at Christmas 2018. And from that point on, we knew that this financial system could no longer be saved, that it was doomed. And it was the big asset management companies that forced the central banks to do what they did afterwards. And they forced them to do what they did within the Corona crisis, for example, where they lowered interest rates to 0 and where they created enormous amounts of money, like during the financial crisis of 2008, 2007, 2008, they created hundreds of billions of dollars, but this time it was trillions. It was trillions. It was 2-digit trillion amounts of dollars. So that's one of the things that the digital financial complex has done. It has taken over the central banks. It has also taken over some, yes?
The asset management managers, how were they able to force the central banks to do this?
Oh, they just have to sell like enormous amounts of shares, so the price of shares goes down. I mean, they are the biggest shareholders all over the world. If you take a look at the big IT companies, their biggest shareholders are always Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and Fidelity. And take a look at the biggest 30 companies here in Germany. Biggest shareholders always BlackRock, Vanguard, mostly also State Street and Fidelity. So if these guys decide to take a market down, the market will go down. If they decide to take a market up, the market will go up. They dominate all markets in the world, and no central bank can come around them. The strange thing is, or not the strange, it's not strange, but the fact is that the Federal Reserve and also the ECB, the European Central Bank, they both have hired BlackRock as their advisor for where to put their money. So they're the top advisor. They're advising the central banks where to put their newly created money. So it's a big circle. It always goes around, and the money always goes into the same pockets.
Okay.
So that's the central banks, but they've created other connections. I mean, they've taken over, like they've also created organizations for themselves. I mean, the big foundations are very important. See, the biggest company, or as far as market capitalization goes, and the top company in the world is Microsoft. Their market capitalization stands at about $2.5 trillion now. They've even overtaken Apple, which was the first company to top 1 trillion in 2018. And Microsoft ran into some trouble in the 90s, where they had several court cases against them. And Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, was in deep trouble then. So he had to do something to polish up his image. And in order to polish up his image, he started a foundation, the William H. Gates Foundation. And he renamed it Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 1999. And actually that helped. That helped increase his image in the public. And actually all the court cases against him were dropped after that. But he used this foundation, and foundations are usually created for 2 reasons. One is tax evasion, and the other is to somehow influence politics in some way or other. And that's what he's been doing for about 21 years now. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the most important foundation in the world, and it actually serves the big IT companies, and it also serves the big asset management companies. And their role is very, very important. Like they founded, for example, Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization. And Gavi, in return, founded ID 2020, which is also very important because it's important in the field of biometrics. See, these foundations are extremely important, and that's one of the means that the digital financial uses to exert its influence on politics. And also they've taken over some organizations, like one of the biggest foundations in the world and the most politically important, That's the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum was created in 1971. It was created by a German professor called Klaus Schwab. He is a professor of engineering and a professor of economics. And he founded what was called the European Management Forum in 1971. Actually, he was at Harvard University. He was a student of Henry Kissinger's a year or two before that. And then he started this European Management Forum. And the interesting thing is that the first time he assembled a greater group of people was in 1971, when he actually assembled 400 top managers from all over Europe. And he was only 33 years old at that time. And he didn't have the money and he didn't have the influence to do that by himself. So there must have been some people behind him. And I suppose that was some people from Harvard, especially Henry Kissinger, that actually furthered him. But that thing has been going on for about 51 years now. Everybody knows about these Davos meetings where the rich, the ultra rich of this world and the mighty in this world, that is the presidents, the prime ministers of the big countries, where they all meet. They meet once a year in Davos. And Klaus Schwab actually started a program to train corporate executives and political leaders in 1992, I think it was. Yes, that was the first class, was a class of 1993. And it's very interesting who he trained then. See, take a look at the class of 93. In that class, you will find names like Aznar, who later became Prime Minister of Spain. You will find Barroso, who later became the commissioner of the EU, the head of the EU Commission. Then Tony Blair, later Prime Minister of Great Britain. Boutros Ghali, who was Secretary General of the United Nations. Then you find Richard Branson. Everybody knows Richard Branson. Everybody knows Bill Gates, who was in that class. Then there was Dell of Dell Computers, which is a very big IT company in the United States. And also you will find Mr. Verhofstadt, who was Prime Minister of Belgium. And you will find Angela Merkel in there, who was Chancellor of Germany. So the biggest names in the corporate elite and in the political elite were trained by the World Economic Forum.
Well, what I was surprised by too is that I read that Vladimir Putin was in that class too, or not the same class perhaps, but...
That is very interesting because Putin doesn't appear in all these lists. I mean, I've taken a look at all of these lists because these classes have been going on until now, starting in 1993, and Putin is not there, but there's some Russian names that do not appear in there. I can't think of the name of the guy who started Telegram. He's also a Russian from St. Petersburg, and he is said to have been a young global leader, but he's nowhere to be found in the lists. So I think some of these names have been taken out, but there are several interviews in the internet or on YouTube where Klaus Schwab actually mentions the name of Vladimir Putin and is really proud that he's one of his crowd.
And what role do you think this network has played? Because it's really surprising that all these people that are in the same class, that they grow up to be presidents or leaders in their industry.
Yeah, I think they're placed somewhere. I mean, Klaus Schwab is a very influential man. I mean, if Klaus Schwab calls the White House, he will get an appointment within a few hours. And not very many people can do that. If he calls the Kremlin, he will be there and he will be received within a few hours. If he calls Xi Jinping in China, he will be heard immediately. He's one of the most influential people in this world because he's been rubbing noses with the rich and the influential and the policymakers in this world for more than 50 years now. And one thing that he really knows about is the progress in the technical sphere. I mean, he was one of the first to know and to find out that the digital sphere was exploding, and that it was very important to get into that. I mean, he wrote a book in, I think it was 2016, about the fourth industrial revolution, which is the implementation of artificial intelligence everywhere. I mean, he is a guy who knows about technology, who knows a lot about technology, and is also very well connected in politics. And I think if you take a look at the leaders right now, I mean, Sebastian Kurz has just been ousted in Austria, but he was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Emmanuel Macron is one of their leaders. Our health minister, our last health minister, Jens Spahn, was a young global leader. Our present foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, she's a young global leader. And your leaders also have a pretty good connection to the World Economic Forum. I know that Mark Rutte and Sigrid Kaag, I looked up their names today. I know that they're listed in the list of agenda contributors to the WEF, or to the World Economic Forum. So
it's
they
even
have.
worse.
Oh, I know. They just published some papers, I think, and they published some letters between Rutte and the World Economic Forum, right?
Yes, there were some members of parliament. They were doing their job, and they got the letters. But it's not just like between the politicians, but huge sums of money have been dedicated. They have entered into agreements that are legally binding, and they openly say that they support the World Economic Forum agenda, where nobody voted for this, and high-level civil servants are working on the agenda. So there's civil servants dedicated to supporting this, and it has not made our mainstream news. Or the mainstream news says that this is conspiracy thinking, and this is just some like of course there's like a management forum and people who come there to how do you say it? Network. It's a networking event.
Yeah.
So if I play devil's advocate, what makes this more than a networking event?
Oh, I mean, they have they call them strategic partners. Those are about 1,000 companies in the world, which of course are the richest and the most powerful companies. They pay the World Economic Forum in between $70,000 and $700,000 a year to be their strategig partners. I mean, that is a network that's never existed in human history. I mean, that is a closely tied network, and these people all know each other. And of course, they supply each other with jobs. They supply each other with opportunities. I mean, they could work very closely together. And they are the ones that are actually steering the world at the moment. I mean, just imagine that about 1,000 top executives of this world can call each other on their mobile phones anytime, can speak to each other, and also it's the same with the politicians. I mean, we've seen 200 governments, almost 200 governments, walk in lockstep for about 2 years now. I mean, their rhetoric has been the same. The measures they've implemented are almost the same. And they all told us that it was for our benefit, that there was a big health problem in this world, which never existed. And we know now that also the World Health Organization has been influenced by these big companies, because the World Health Organization until the 1990s was financed by its member states. And since the 1980s, their contributions have dropped, and most of the contributions now come from private donors. That is mostly companies. I mean, last year or the year before that, it was already about 80 or 90% of the money that came from private companies. And of course, they don't donate money without having some thoughts about how this money will be used. So the World Health Organization is also, in a way, subordinate to the interest of these big companies, and in that way also subordinated to the World Economic Forum.
Wow, and what role has the digital financial, not the financial complex, but the digital complex played in this?
Well, see, the big thing about our world now is that data is so important, and that artificial intelligence has been taken over in the background. I mean, people don't know about this. I mean, just there's one example which shows how far artificial intelligence has gotten. I think it was in 1994 or so that the world chess champion, Mr. Karpov, then played against a chess computer which was called Big Blue. It was an IBM computer, and it was a big sensation that in 1994 Karpov lost to this computer. If you take any world champion ever since and let them play against the computer today, they will all lose. They won't even be able to get a draw against one of these chess computers. And that's how far artificial intelligence has advanced. And of course, artificial intelligence will interfere with the labor market. It has been interfering with the labor market and will turn the labor market upside down in the next 10 years. And we've seen this autonomous driving explode. If you just think about like 5 or 10 years in the future, if all vehicles drive autonomously, that will make millions of drivers obsolete. They will lose their jobs. The same goes for teachers. If you go on with homeschooling, or even if you use computers in schools, you don't have to have teachers anymore. You can put kids in front of a screen, and instead of hiring like 100,000 teachers for a big country like Germany, I mean, we have 800,000 teachers right now. You could easily go along with 800 teachers. I mean, that's a big upheaval in the labor market, and it's the IT companies that are actually following this path. So they are creating our future, and also they have created a large part of our world already, and also they control all other companies. If you have a company that might, for example, that produces soup, or if you have a company that produces furniture or so, you had to digitalize your enterprise. And by digitalizing your enterprise, you had to have one of these IT companies organize your digitization. And that means that they have insight into everything, into all your production processes, into all your financial transactions. So they know everything about you. So that's the first industry in the world that the world has ever seen that knows everything about their clients. And of course, their clients are totally dependent on them. If you have a big company nowadays, if you have big, like one of those middle-class big enterprises, you're totally dependent on these IT companies. They can switch you off, they can switch you on. You are 100% dependent on their benevolence.
We see that in another way play out in Canada right now, where they're turning off the bank accounts of the truckers. So
yeah, that's a very interesting phenomenon. Yes.
So yeah,
I mean, what's going on in Canada is really interesting, because that might be kind of the spark that will. I don't know. It might be the spark that will cause a big fire all over the world. I don't know yet, but I mean, it's gone on for a while now, and the government has not been very intelligent, because they always thought that the truckers would somehow lose patience and go home, but they're not going home. On the contrary, a large part of the population is supporting them right now. The latest reports from Canada that I've heard is that about half of the population now supports the truckers, and of course that's a big problem for the government. And the size of the problem can be seen in the fact that they're even calling for martial law right now. I mean, they've implemented this. It is actually martial law. It's called somewhat else, but it is martial law, and it's only being called out for 3 times before. It was called out in World War I, World War II, and then during the oil crisis, I think, or during some terrorist acts in Quebec by Justin Trudeau's father. And now he calls for that. That shows that he's up against the wall right now. I mean, that is very interesting. But interesting also is the fact that that the government now is advising the banks not to pay out the money that has been donated to the truckers. I mean, that should tell everybody how dangerous digital money is, and that should also make people aware of what's awaiting us if we ever accept central bank digital currencies, because that will mean that we will have this situation forever. That the country will, that the government will be able to tell us you can get your money or you can't get your money.
Yeah, so this might be a very visible way, because it's been very difficult to communicate the digital money, why it's an issue, and now people just see it on the television. Because I saw all these pictures of empty ATMs. So yeah, it's a quick way for people to lose trust in the banks.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, that's one of the big things of the future, because what we're seeing right now is the takedown of the system. I mean, actually, what we've seen, if you take a look at the financial system has been broken for about 20, 22 years now. The first time the financial system broke down was in 1998, when one of the big hedge funds in New York collapsed and almost went bankrupt, and the banks had to buy it up for about $4 billion, because it would have caused a damage of about $1 trillion, which would have taken down some of the big banks. Then we've had the world financial crisis in 2007, 2008, which would have taken down the system had not the big central banks stepped in and created huge sums of money and lowered interest rates time and again. I mean, interest rates were lowered for about 700 to 800 times by all global central banks within the time span between 2008 and 2018. And then we had the next big problem in the financial system was in 2000, was the Euro crisis, of course, where the problem was so big that it was no longer just the banks that were in trouble, but it was whole countries that were in trouble, and they had to save countries like Greece and Cyprus. So the problem kept growing. And then after that, they had these big problems with the turnaround, when in 2017, 2018, they tried to turn around the system, when they tried to raise rates again, when that did not work, and that was around Christmas 2018, when the financial markets collapsed again. And then we had the crisis in the repo market in America, in the USA, that was in September 2019, where the central bank, the Federal Reserve, had to step in with trillions of dollars in order to save, on the one hand, big banks and hedge funds. And they never told anybody who they saved, because that was kept a secret. But nowadays we know that it was banks like JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in America. It was Deutsche Bank, it was Nomura, and the Japanese big bank. They got this money because they had to stabilize them in order to keep the system going. And of course, these banks know that they will be saved, because in the slogan was given out in 2007, 2008, you can be too big to fail. So that's what these banks are using. I mean, they can undergo any risk they want to. They will be saved, and they were saved again. But that was with trillions and trillions of dollars. So the system was very fragile. So they knew that something had to come in order to save the system. And out of the blue came a virus which made them stop the whole world economy, which caused a global lockdown. And then the first thing they had to do was they had to save the big corporations, the big banks again. I mean, they would never have been able to do this without a virus. They would never have been able to do this again, because everybody remember that even in 2007, 2008, people were really angry about this, the moves about saving the big ones, the rich ones. And we had Occupy Wall Street and all these organizations that popped up. And they knew that this was going to meet a large resistance within the population. So that's why this virus was a heavenly present for them. And of course, it was the greatest wealth transfer that we've seen in the history of mankind. That was the wealth transfer after 2020, in 2020 and 2021. And the rich have never gotten richer in such a short period of time than in 2021, 2020.
So if you look, so you mentioned like this is a takedown of that system, but they're trying to put something new in place. What do you think they are trying to put in place?
Yeah, they know that the system is broken, so they're just pillaging the system right now. They're pillaging the system, and they know they don't have to care about the aftermath, because the aftermath is, in their heads, the aftermath looks like this. They want to completely overthrow the banking system as it is. You see, all these small banks are being bought up by the big banks right now. All these small banks are being closed right now because they're betting on digital banking. And the big plan is to take credit, the issuing of credit away from the banks and give that into the hands of the central banks. That is central bank digital money. That is their recipe for the future. And they're even trying it out. I mean, the government of China is leading the race at the moment. They've already handed out more than 140 million wallets. I mean, central bank digital currency will work like this. You will have a wallet on your mobile phone, and you will be directly connected with the central bank. The central bank will give you credit if you need it, and you will have to make all transactions via the central bank. And the normal banking system will no longer work the way it has been working for several hundred years now. The banks will only work in the they will do the derivative business and all these bets, but they will no longer hand out loans and credit. That will be done by the central banks. So everybody will be 100% dependent on the central bank. Of course, the central bank can cut everybody off from all financial flows. They can issue different tax rates. They can penalize you if you don't, like in Canada right now, if you don't go along with what the government wants you to go along with, they can cut you off from all sorts of transactions. But they can also tie their payments to geographical conditions, and they can also make it. They can also make it payable only for a certain amount of time, and that's the thing that they have in the back of their minds, because they know that millions and millions of people will lose their jobs within the next few years, and they have an idea in the back of their head, and that is called universal basic income. They think that all these people, and the problem for the system is that all these people that will lose their jobs will be lost as consumers, and our economy is consumer driven. That is, the consumers have to spend their money in order to prop up the economy and keep the economy going. And if all these people, if these millions of people lose their jobs, they will no longer function as consumers. So what can you do? Their solution is we pay them universal basic income. And we will pay them, like in Europe, we will pay them 1,000 or 1,500 a month, but we will tell them you will have to spend this money within a period of 30 days. And also you will have to abide, you will have to comply. If you don't, you won't get money next month. So that's the way they are going to totally control us. And of course, this is a measure by the digital financial complex, because the digital companies, the IT companies, will organize this. And the financial complex, they will go on speculating in the derivative sector. So it's the two of them working together via the central banks. I mean, the central banks, we have to understand, the central banks are no longer independent. The central banks have become an arm of the digital financial complex and one of their most important weapons in this war.
And you also mentioned that the central banks can tax some of the money. What is the relationship between the government and the central bank?
Well, the central bank is a part of the government. So, but the governments are also subordinated to the digital financial complex. I mean, we've seen that during the past 2 years. There's not one politician in the world who is still in office who does not comply with the demands of the digital financial complex. We've seen some very few governments that did not go along with this health agenda. I mean, one with Tanzania, good. Their president now is dead. The other is Belarus, and their president there's been enormous pressure on this president. He has withstood this pressure so far, but that has caused him lots of problems. And otherwise, I think the president of Rwanda did not go along with this, and one or two other governments did not go along with this, but they're not very, very important. I mean, all the big governments have gone along with this, and individual politicians that did not go along with this, they were ousted. They're gone. They no longer have their jobs.
So basically, our governments are really not in control anymore. They are being controlled.
They never really were in control, but they had a certain span within which they could do their thing. I mean, like if you go back about 10 years ago or so, governments were able to do this or to do that, but that is no longer the case. After 2019, after the fall of the repo market and after the lockdowns in 2020, the governments all over the world have to go along, and they have to go along in lockstep with the demands of the digital financial complex. They have become incredibly powerful.
So why do you think there haven't been more government whistleblowers?
Um, there's a lot of corruption going on. I think I mean, a lot of people have been bought, and also you have to see that the social media and the media in general today are censored like hell. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people that might have spoken up were just censored, and we never heard about them. We've never heard of them. I mean, I know about my own work. My own work. I've been doing this work for several years now, but I reach far less people than I used to reach, and a lot of my work is just being deleted. I just had an article removed from my YouTube channel just about 2 days ago
Mm.
because I was actually they told me that I was spreading medical misinformation. The information that I was spreading was that I stated a fact. I stated the fact that the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization was one of the founding members of ID 2020, and it is.
Mhm.
But they
Yes.
call that medical misinformation, and they took down this article, and they gave me what they call one strike for my YouTube channel. So I have to watch out now.
That's a very interesting, you mentioned it before, but it's a very interesting connection because it's a connection between digital ID and vaccination. And right now,
Yes.
there's a lot of, it's becoming increasingly clear that this vaccination green card, that it's the foot in the door for digital ID, of course, that is probably going to be linked to the digital currencies.
That
Um,
that has been the dream of all IT companies ever since the 90s. Biological identification. See what they had. You know what wearables are. You have an Apple Watch, for example, and you can be identified via that watch. But you can take that watch off, and then
mhm,
you're no longer they're no longer able to identify you. So with it, I know that in the circles of the central banks, they've for a long time been talking about implementing tattoos or giving people vaccinations and putting some stuff inside their bodies so they can be biometrically identified. And that's of course the dream of the ID companies, because that way, I mean, you don't you can like use a train. You don't have to have an Apple Watch anymore.
uh-huh,
The train company will know when you step on the train. They will know when you step off the train. They can send you the bill at night. They can take that out of your account. I mean, that's a world in which a lot of jobs and a lot of transactions are no longer necessary, which would, on the one hand, make a lot of things much easier, but it would, on the other hand, give very few people enormous control over the rest of the people. And that
mhm,
actually is the basic problem in this world, that the world is controlled by a very tiny minority of people, and whatever they do in their own interest, and they do not do it in the interest of the people.
Because hypothetically, if like with the digitization, if you had like a more civilized society, you could say now we can spend more time on education, on leisure, on developing culture. Then this automation would not be that negative. But if you have like a
Yeah.
tiny minority that's using it to install a digital prison, then
Yeah.
it becomes a whole other story.
See, the internet could have been used to teach everybody in the world how to read and write, but it wasn't used that way. It was used to entertain the people in the industrial nations, and it was never used to heighten the intellectual level of countries in which you have large parts of the population that can't read or write. So it was not used for the benefit of people. It was used for the benefit of those few that control this system and that control the IT companies.
So looking forward, if you look at the future, what do you think we can expect right now? Where are we in this
Oh,
transition?
we're at a very critical turning point right now, because the takeover of AI, of artificial intelligence, has only begun. What we're going to see within the next few years is an enormous loss of jobs. Like there are some, like the University of Oxford, they're saying something like 800 million jobs will be lost within the next 8 years. I mean, there are other companies. There are some big marketing companies that say 1.2 billion jobs will be lost. I mean, even if it's only half of that, all these people will no longer be able to work, and their jobs will be taken over by artificial intelligence. And of course, as I said, the plan is to give these people, give them a universal basic income in order to keep them as consumers. But that will not work, because once you give these people the money without that money having any value, that means that inflation will be rampant. I mean, inflation will go up, and we will live in an age where inflation will be a normal part of our lives, and that cannot go on forever. So actually, the solution that the small minority has, even if it's put into place, it will not work. But I don't know when it will be put into place. Right now, we're in sort of a transitional stage. I mean, they're taking down the system, but they have not implemented the new system, because also they're still working on this. I mean, they're still having big tests. I mean, the Americans, they're testing CBDCs on the Bahama Islands, for example, with the sand dollar. They're testing them on in some of the Virgin Islands, somewhere in St. Lucia, in some small spots, somewhere in the Caribbean. The Chinese are testing it in big cities. They're very far ahead. And one of the big problems in the world is that the Chinese are so far ahead. And I think that's also one thing that is behind, like, the Americans getting out of Afghanistan without destroying any of the bases there. I mean, there must have been something that the Chinese have had to blackmail the US to get out of the way within the Silk Belt Road. And that's why the Americans got out of Afghanistan. I think the Chinese might have told the Americans, if you don't get out of Afghanistan, we're going to come up with a CBDC. And we're going to come up with CBDC tied maybe to gold, and with a CBDC that is not only ushered in China, but also in the countries of the New Silk Road, that is around half of the world. I mean, that would be Central Asia, parts of Eastern Europe, and Africa. And that would, like, kill the dollar instantly. So we're in a transitional period which is actually full of dangers. We've seen this Ukraine crisis explode, whereas I think that was just blown up in order to make people look that way, in order not to look the other way, because right now they're having a problem with people no longer believing the narrative of this ultra-destructive virus. So I don't know what to expect, but I'm very sure that we will have big turmoil, that they won't even and I think they might even start civil wars. I mean, that is, I think, in the back of their head, that they might start civil wars. They're trying to get people to pose people against each other. I mean, you have the vaccinated, you have the unvaccinated. They've tried this. They will do the same thing with the proponents of climate change and the others who do not believe that narrative. So they will go on creating a lot of dissents within the population in order to go along to continue their plans in the background. And their plans in the background, that is no other. The biggest plan is the introduction of central bank digital currencies.
Exactly, and they're not done with that yet, because that's something that when I see the truckers, then and I see all the measures are being dropped, and I kind of look at social media, and everyone is getting very excited, like, they're dropping the measures, and now we can get back to normal. And that was actually one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk with you, because when I see that, then I think, no, you're not seeing the bigger picture. Like, this has been developed over, like, decades, and they have a plan. They have an end stage in mind that they're working towards, and it's not really about health and these health measures. If they, through these measures, it created a Pavlov effect, and everyone is doing a chip to get into. They're willing to use a QR code to go to a bar to have coffee, then they have reached their goals, and we still have the QR. So so I think it's really important to understand these kind of plans and what they are working towards. And what can you recommend to people what are very simple or concrete actions that people can take to maintain their freedom?
Well, one of the things is that you have to protect yourself. You have to be prepared for what's coming. I mean, everybody should have some cash at home, because we might have bank holidays. we might see something like we've seen in Greece or in Cyprus. So if they close, if it actually comes to the point that the financial system collapses, banks will close, we will have a bank holiday, and you will not be able to get cash. The ATM machines will be empty very soon. So it's good to have some cash at home. But on the other hand, of course, inflation will make cash less valuable in the future. So it's a good idea to keep some silver at home. If you have a little more money, keep some gold at home. Go into some physical assets. But the most important thing, I think, is to get together with other people who have begun to see through what is actually happening. Because the biggest problem that people are facing now is that as soon as they find out that there's something going on behind the scenes, they feel kind of lonesome, they feel kind of left alone. So you have to find other people. You have to do a lot of networking within the alternative community. I think that is really important. You have to get together and you have to protect your kids. I mean, I don't know about all this masking. It might come back next winter. They might come up with the next virus. They might come up with something else. You never know. But the most important thing is I think you have to explain, and you have to have a lot of patience. You have to explain to other people what's going on behind the scenes, so a lot of people can understand that. I think that is also very important for the truckers movement, and I think they're moving into a very good position because I've seen some of their press conferences, and they've actually mentioned things that we're not content with the lifting of this measure and the lifting of that measure. All measures have to be lifted, and also they're insisting on paying cash. I mean, that's good for a start. I think they're on a very good way, and I hope that a lot of people go along, and I hope that will be the spark that will initiate the fire that will move over to Europe sometime.
That would be very nice.
Oh, I can't hear you at the moment. Yes. Sorry.
No, that would be nice if
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
part.
you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, this has been a very helpful interview.
Thank you. It might sound a little pessimistic because I mean we're in a dangerous situation right now, but there is also a reason to be optimistic because the agenda of the other side is against human nature, and I think that in the end human nature will win, and that's why I'm very optimistic for the long run. We might have encounter a lot of problems and a lot of trouble in the short run, but in the long run we're going to win this race, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, I